Welcome back, everybody. Joining us on Retain today is sales expert Glenn Poulos. Glenn is the vice president and manager of Network Wireless Solutions, a telecom company that specializes in wired and wireless solutions. With over 3 decades of sales experience, Glenn has accumulated extensive knowledge in the field and used this knowledge to establish and grow successful companies. Glenn, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Lauren. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. I am excited for our conversation today because we actually, just to kind of give you some context on this episode or on this show alone, we always talk about retention. We talk about different strategies and we touch on sales from time to time, but we don't really deep dive into it. So I'm definitely excited for our conversation today to learn all about the world of sales and see what you have to say from your awesome years of experience. So I am very excited about that, but let's kick it off. I would love to just find out more about your background and what got you into sales in the first place.
All right. Sounds good. So, so I'm 61. So, I was born in 1962 and I graduated college in 82. And I accepted a job. I went to technical school for electronics, and I accepted a job with the government. Believe it or not, as a civil servant, I was fixing electronic gizmos for the Canadian government, Environment Canada, and National Weather Service for the American listeners. And I was there for a few years. I got a chance to work up in the Arctic for a while, which I knew that definitely wasn't for me. 5 people on a weather station for a year was quite a story, that's for sure. And but anyways, I came out of the Arctic after a while, and I went and worked for them at head office in Downsview, Ontario, near Toronto. And my boss pulled me aside one day and he says, "Glenn, you're in the wrong job. You should quit this job. You should go into sales or something like that." And I'm like, okay. And I was a young kid. I didn't think much of it, but I did listen to him, and I started flipping through the paper, and I ended up getting a job working for a company in as technical sales, right? And which is what I still do today. And I worked for them for about 5 years, and then I approached them about an opportunity for them to sort of split their business. And I was going to turn 30, and I wanted to start my own company before the age of 30, right? It was 29 and a half. And this was a milestone for me. It's like, I gotta have my own business by 30, right? And so I came to them with this idea to split up one little piece of the technology that I thought was going to do well, and they could keep the core business, and then I would let them own some, and I would own some, and I'd be an entrepreneur, and everything would be perfect, right? And the president said, "Oh, Glenn," he says, "you can show me your plan, but I'm going to show you it's probably not going to work. You're better just keeping your job." And so the next day, I actually resigned. Instead of showing him my plan, I showed him my resignation letter. And the other funny part about it was, in addition to being 29 and a half, I'd also been married for 6 days at the time.
No way. Wow.
And so, I forgot to check with my wife before I quit my job, right? And I said, "Don't worry, honey, though, it'll be fine," right? And so I started my own business in sales, selling these, and I based the company on this newfangled technology, which of course, it never went anywhere, right? Like the president of the other company would said, and it ended up being based on the cell phone, right? Now, we weren't selling cell phones; we were selling equipment into the cell phone industry, right? Antennas and network equipment, things like that, right? And of course, we know where the cell phone went. And I grew that company for 15 years. I sold it, and there were some issues that happened with the sale of that business. I ended up actually starting a new business shortly after that, and I grew that for 15 years until February of 2022. And last year, I sold my company, Gap Wireless, to NWS, National Network Wireless Solutions, and I stayed on with the private equity firm, and I'm going to work here for a few years, and I'm helping them to integrate the businesses together into one unified company, right? Yeah. And so that's how I got here. Sort of 3 sales companies, 2 of which were my businesses. Cool. 2 exits, one more successful than the other, frankly, but and lots of growth along the way. And but primarily our business is a sales company. And we take products from around the world. We visit our customers and we show them what's great about them, and they buy them from us. And that's, we're not really a manufacturer or something like that. Right. We're a distributor, right? So
very cool.
Yeah.
Wow, that is awesome.
That's how I got
2
here.
exits under your belt in the span of 30 years. That's crazy. Yeah. That's really cool. And so I know part of that, which obviously the listeners might see in one of our clip recordings, but I can see in the back, there's that book cover that says never sit in the lobby. So I'm curious to know when you wrote that, in terms of as part of this journey that you've been on, obviously.
Sure.
But what even just inspired you to write this book?
So back when I got my first job after the government, there were like 4 guys that owned the business, and they were really good salespeople. And they just had so many like techniques and just they had these disciplines that they followed all the time, right? And I started to realize them and notice them and what have you. And then I ended up writing them down, and then I started naming them after people, and then I start repeating them, and I'd say, oh, you're doing a Barry Watson, and they're like, what's a Barry Watson, right? And then I would explain, oh, that's a technique I learned from Barry, and where you do this and that, and people would laugh and they say, oh, that's brilliant. And then a few guys, like other salespeople from other companies, said, hey, can you share some of that with our company at our sales meeting? And so I started doing a little bit of talking back then. And, but I continued to write them down. And then of course people were like, oh, you should write a book, and this was like a long time ago. This was in like the late 80s and early 90s. And of course I never did. Right. But I kept writing them down in the same little notebook that I had. And when the pandemic hit, I thought I really wanted to get the book done, right? Like I knew I had all these little rules that I'd created, and it had been gnawing away at me here and there over the years. And I took a little stab at it probably 10 years ago, but I just couldn't get my sync on. And so when the pandemic hit, and I mean, although I had to keep this office open for the customers, like we service the telecom, so we had to stay open. Right. I mean, it was just me and the warehouse people. Everyone else had to go home. And of course, on the weekends and the evenings, being Canadian, that where we were all sitting, it was at home, and so I thought, hey, what better time to do it than now, right? And so Absolutely. I committed that I was going to get up every Saturday and Sunday morning, and I was going to write until I had around 2,500 words every weekend until the book was done. And as the joke goes, I said I wrote until I got to 75,000 words. Then I sent it to an editor, and the lady sent it back, and she said, Glenn, you're not allowed to say the F word that many times in a book. And so I said, okay, why don't we agree on 71,000 words, and the book will be done, right? And it took a few months. But, I just committed to writing and I learned that on a podcast that I had listened to on how to write a book, right? And it was the first podcast. And the guy said, write 500 words every morning before you do anything else, right? And I thought, well, I already have things I do on Monday to Friday. And I said, but on the weekends, I've got this little swing time in the morning before anyone gets up. And I'll do all 5 times 500, Monday to Fridays on the weekend, right? I'll do the 2,500 and that I can commit to. And that's what I did. And it was incredible how fast it kind of goes once you get into it. And and it was fun. And then, there's a lot of resources for self-published authors now, to an editor, copy editor, content editor, book cover designer, keyword editor, title, people that help you suggest titles. And so there's so many resources, and how to format it for Amazon. And then I recorded the audiobook myself, and
nice.
That was fun too. And and so the funny thing was that the way the timing worked of selling the business and the book kind of delays in both of them. They were supposed to be several months apart, but the book actually came out the same week that I sold the company, right? And so,
wow.
Yeah, so in a way, I mean, it was a little bit like anticlimactic in a way, in the sense that I kind of, like I was selling my business, for a fair bit of money, and it was a pretty big deal, right? And this is a big company in the US, so they kind of had to have my attention, and so I was kind of distracted from the book launch. So it wasn't like I was able to like go all in, but I mean, it's all done virtually now anyways. It's all on Amazon. It's not like I was doing book tours or anything, right?
Yeah.
Now it's mainly podcasts and, and Amazon SEO, search engine optimization. So,
yeah.
But yeah, so it's coincidental. I sold the business in February 2022 and the book came out.
That is a nice week, I would say.
Yeah, for sure.
That is a good week to have. I do like that.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And I guess, honestly, I commend you for the fact that you sat down every Saturday and Sunday morning to write that many words, because I feel like writing a book is such a big, like, it seems like a lot to get done in one sense, because how do you make sure that it flows? How do you make sure you get all that stuff in there?
Yeah. And the other interesting part that I like to share as well was that when I was doing it, I get up really early, right? And my wife does not. Let's just say that, right? And so I never even told her that I was writing a book, right? And so
that's awesome.
So I didn't tell her until like a few days before the book was coming out. And I said, by the way, And she's
Surprise.
like, what? Yeah. And so it was really funny. And I just found it better to be that way, because I don't like when I'm going to be writing a book. I'm going to be writing a book. And, it just feels kind of like poserish, you know what I mean? Or what have you. So, fair. I prefer to say to myself, I'm going to do it, then tell everyone I did it, rather than say I'm going to be doing it. And I kind of do that with a lot of things. Right. And I don't just tell my wife, 30 years ago that I'm going to quit my job. And I just quit my job and go home and say, by the way, yeah. So
that's awesome. And so with your book, I'm curious to know, because I'm curious about the title itself, but I'm curious, what's the one main thing that sets your book apart? Because even myself, I love reading sales books or sales and business strategy books, but it's very hard to choose which one do I go with, especially when you don't know what might be inside, or obviously everyone's kind of talking about different topics and it's hard to choose. So if you had to almost even give yourself like an elevator pitch of what's the one main thing that stands out about your book or sets you apart from others, what would you say that's it? So
that's easy. The book is what you get out of the book in a summary is you learn how to get, act, and stay in front of your clients and be a pleasure to do business with always. And that's the mantra of the book, right? It's 2-part mantra, right? Get, act, and stay in front of the clients.
Nice.
And be a pleasure to do business with always. And each one of them are very important, right? I mean, getting and staying and acting in front of the customers, but also when you're there, you want to be a pleasure to do business with. Yep. And the other interesting thing about the book is it's not a system book like, spin selling or challenger model, where it's this like complicated process that you follow. You can flip to any point in the book and learn a rule that I follow. Right. And, a lot of people will say, I got to go see this customer, but I really don't know, what to do. And I get there, or why I'm going to see him or whatever. And I say, that's easy. Just show up with something in your hand and something in your mind. Right. Which is one of the chapters. Right. And it's just like a rule, right? It's like, if you're going to go see a customer, you don't have to overthink it, but you always have something with you in your hand, whether it's literature or a quotation they ask for, or it might be swag, or, but always have something in your hand and always have something in your mind or on your mind that you want to talk to them about. Right. And by passing the thing over to them and then saying, hey, I just wanted to talk to you about X, Y, or Z, you can typically, engage them in the conversation. The worst thing is to show up with nothing and nothing on your mind. Right. I mean, that is a bad look.
That's a tough go. Definitely a tough go.
Yeah. So the book is designed, you can sort of flip it open, and that's just one of the 57 tips, right? Where you can, cool. That you learn, and then you can put it down, you pick it up a few days later and, flip to another chapter. And some of them are very short. Some of them are a little longer. Some of them have like stories. Most of the stories are like kind of like mistakes that you don't want to repeat. And, but they're there for comedic value and, or shock value in some cases. And, but yeah, so it's just a series of disciplines that you can follow that help you to game the system a little bit, to have an advantage over people that are not following, a set of rules, right? So.
Yeah, that makes sense. And something that you commented on was actually what I was going to bring up next to dive a little bit deeper into, which is that phrase that you coined, which was how to get, act, and stay in front of customers and be a pleasure to do business with always. So let's break that down. There's a lot in there. And so I'm curious to kind of break that down, learn more about the different pieces of that, because you have how to get them, how to act, how to stay in front, and then be a pleasure to do business with. So I guess starting out under that topic, what kind of strategies or approaches do you recommend for companies to get in front of potential customers? What are some things that you recommend there?
Right. So and there's all sorts of tips in the book about, whether you're phoning them, emailing them, or what have you. Right. But, and of course, nowadays you're not really like cold calling in the sense of like knocking on the doors, although sometimes you can do that. But I mean, nowadays, especially after the pandemic, that's kind of hard to do. And I've always sold high ticket items. So, but there's sort of that like first time you're getting in front of a customer, which is, how do I get in front of that? But then there's the one where a lot of times, salespeople have a book of territory that they're dealing with 50 clients, 100 clients. And, in some cases, they're supposed to be visiting these customers on a regular basis. And so a lot of my tips are more for the person that are trying to get back in front, like how do you continually get in front of that customer, right? And so I have all sorts of little tricks that I do where, for instance, if I'm there visiting one customer, there's another one I might want to talk to. I'll ask him to drop me by his desk on the way by so I can drop off the literature I have in my hand and in my mind, right, to that guy before we leave or whatever. And then when I go and see them, what I'll do is I'll make an appointment and then I'll just say, hey, you know what? Here's the literature. I wanted to drop this off, but I'm back next week seeing Sally. Could I get 15 minutes on your calendar next week when I'm here, to talk to you about some of the stuff? And usually they say yes. I mean, I'm in the kind of business selling the kind of things these people, engage with vendors on a regular basis. Right. And so they'll usually say yes. So now I know next Thursday, I have a 15-minute set aside for this guy. But then I can call other people like Sally or Jack or whatever. And I say, hey, I'm visiting Bob next Thursday at 10, for 15 or 20 minutes. While I'm there,
keep that momentum going.
Could I get some time with you or whatever? Oh, I'm really busy. I'm like, okay, well, could you pop down to the lobby and see me for a minute? Okay, but I can only see in the lobby. Right. And so then I know that I've got, the one guy for 15 minutes, then maybe I can, get my way over to him through the building, or I will go back to the lobby and say, hey, you said, touch base with you. And, the odd time they might say, oh, I'm really busy, I can't come down. But obviously most of the time they come down.
Yeah.
And so now I've engaged with it. And all the while I'm looking for the next engagement with each customer and booking it out. Right. There's a long story about going to Winnipeg where I used to get all the business in Winnipeg and my competitors never realized how I did it. And and I mean, you're Canadian, so you know what Winterpeg is like, right?
Yes,
and it's famous in Canada for its unpleasant weather, right? And I even talk about my car freezing there. I had to get a new rental car because I didn't plug in my car. I'm like, what do you mean plug in my car? And this wasn't a Tesla. This was like 25 years ago, right? And but anyways, but I went every 6 to 8 weeks. I would go to Winnipeg, bar none. Like for sure, it was always dialed into my calendar. So I would show up and I would do these prospecting calls. Hey, I'm coming to Winnipeg. Can I come by? I have something in my hand. I have something in my mind, to talk to you about. I would do that. And then they would say, oh, I'm kind of interested in X, Y, or Z, or Bob in the building's interested in this. And, oh, could you run me by his desk? Yes. Okay. Hey, by the way, I'm back in 8 weeks. Could I bring the unit with me and I can show it to you? And they're like, yeah, sure. Well, you're back in 8 weeks. Wow. Nobody ever comes to see us in Winterpeg, right? And I'm like, yeah, no, I'm here every 6 to 8 weeks. Like, wow. Okay. And so, and then all the visits that I'm at, I'm booking the next ones and the next ones and the next ones. So by the time I leave Winnipeg, I already have my next 8 weeks pretty much filled up. And I just leave the slack time for, following up or potential new things that might crop up while I'm in town for 1 or 2 days. Right. So that's how I get there. Right.
Nice.
And it's also sort of how I stay there. Right. Because I'm constantly engaging. The mistake that people make is, and this comes up when I talk to people about this a lot, and this is a good time to tell you the story where, the guy will go once or something, or he'll get one sort of kick at the can with a customer. And then I'll say to the follow up with the sales guy, I'll say, oh, what's going on with, that Rockwell deal you were doing? Oh, yeah. They're interested. I'm like, oh, what happened? He goes, oh, well, yeah, they wanted a quote. And I'm like, oh, okay. And of course, one of my rules is never fax the facts and never ship the shit. right? Sorry, I hope that I can say that on your
Yeah.
podcast. But
I think so. I'm not sure.
You always drop it off. You always drop it off, right? I'm saying, oh, well, did you drop it off? And they're like, well, no, I emailed it. And I'm like, oh, you emailed the quote? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, oh, well, did they get back? Did they reply? And they're like, no, they haven't replied yet. And I'm like, well, did you follow up? And they're like, well, yeah, I called them. And I'm like, well, what did they say? They go, well, they didn't answer. I left a voicemail. And I said, okay, they didn't call you back? And he's like, well, no. And I said, okay, let me get this right. They want to buy $100,000 instrument from you. You emailed the quote, to which they didn't reply. Then you phoned and left a voicemail, which they haven't phoned you back. I said, so where do you feel you are in the competitive landscape of getting this guy's business? Right. And you see, what I would be doing is I would hand deliver the quote. If the guy would say, can you send me a quote? Then I would say, sure, no problem. Most people think I'm going to email it, or, in the old days you would mail it, or, in the middle you would fax it, right? That's where I came up with that funny saying, don't fax the facts, right? And, so I would say, so a lot of times I would either call, or I would just, a day or so later, I would just show up in the lobby and I would call Bob from the lobby, or get the lady to call or something and say, hey, I'm in the lobby. And he's like, why? And he goes, well, you asked for a quote. And he's like, yeah, okay, I have your quote. Come and get it. Right. It's like, oh, I didn't expect you to drop it off. Or I'll say on the phone, I'll bring you the quote. I'm going to be there in 2 days. Can I drop it off? Oh, I'm really busy. How about I just drop it in the lobby? They're like, okay. And then the 2 days later go by and I phone him from the lobby. He forgot that he told me he was too busy. And so he agrees to come down. Right. Yeah. I give him the quote. Something in my mind. What do you think of the quote? How does it look? And then my next rule is, again, how do I act in front of the customer? I always ask them for a mini tour. Right. And he's like, well, mini tour, what's a mini tour? And I said, a mini tour is a tour that's mini, right? It's like not a tour. A tour takes all day.
They're not committing to anything here.
They're not committing to anything. And they're like, oh, a tour. And I'm like, yeah. I said, just pop me around your new lab, your new office, your new warehouse, your new factory, your new this, your new that, whatever reason I'm there for. I try to get past the door because, again, we're selling things to these customers, right? So the chances are they own things from our competitors. And if I've never been there, I don't know, like, has he, I probably know whether he does or doesn't have my stuff, but, maybe there's brand A, brand B, brand C. I walk into the lab and all of a sudden there's 25 instruments from this other brand. And I'm thinking, geez, I don't think this guy's buying my product. He probably just wants a competitive quote. Right. And so, that's one of the rules always, and so and maybe I drop the quote off, maybe he asks for a demo. Then again, he'll say, just ship me a demo or whatever. And I'll say, oh no, I mean, our policy is we have to drop it off and set it up, right? Because of the liability and what have you. So I'm back here next Wednesday. Can I get a few minutes? We'll set it up, make sure everything's good. Okay, fine. And then I'll get there and then he'll say, I need it for 2 weeks. I said, oh no, we can't do 2 weeks. And he's like, why not? I said, oh, this unit's far too busy. I said, we can do 3 or 4 days max. I said, it's Wednesday. I'm coming to see Sally on Tuesday. Can I pick it up Tuesday? Oh, okay. And I'll even try, depending upon the value, to even go in the middle to see if they're even using it. Because most of the time they just look at it for an hour here or there, and they're comparing it. They don't actually like turn it on and run it for 2 weeks straight, right?
Which also
you're wasting the valuable equipment that your company's invested in to show customers where it could be somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
And so that's like how I act and stay in front of the customers. And sort of the acting part is all about my rapport building that I do. Right. And, and so there's chapters in there, like one I call it's called implied familiarity also breeds contempt. Right. And so I don't know if you've ever heard the saying familiarity breeds contempt, but it means when you're like you become hyper familiarized with someone, then it kind of like just ticks you off. So imagine you kind of get stuck with someone to go away on a trip or whatever, right? And you're kind of like glued to them for a week, maybe on a business trip or training or whatever. And you're ambivalent about the person going into it. By the end of it, you can't stand them, right? Because they're always clicking their gums and, they make funny noises and, or they're whatever. Like people have these weird, quirky things. And if you get too familiarized and too compressed with some person, you get contemptuous about it, right? And so, there's that saying, but I made up a new one called implied familiarity, meaning when you imply that you're familiar with me, that makes me upset, right? So the example I give in the book where I went into a customer and there was a picture of him fishing behind his desk, like up on the top of the thing, like behind me, right? And I had some cockamamie line where I'm like, oh, I didn't realize you were a fisherman and I love fishing. We should go fishing sometime or something like that, right? And the guy looks over his shoulder and he says, oh my God. He says, I forgot that photo was there. He goes, that's my ex-father-in-law. I'm divorced from my wife and I never liked that guy. I only ever went fishing with him to please my wife, and I'm not even married to her anymore. He grabs the photo, throws it in the garbage, right? And now all of a sudden, I just pissed this guy off, pretending, and I don't even fish, right? And I'm just, you know what I'm saying? It's just complete bogusness and it's not genuine, right?
Yeah.
And the better thing to do would be to say, oh, who's that in the fishing photo behind you? And then give him a chance to,
explain
himself before I offer him to go on a fishing trip, right?
I surely wasn't expecting that to be his ex-father-in-law. That's a tough go.
And so there's lots of chapters on building rapport and maintaining rapport, active listening. I'm a huge fan of active listening and practicing active listening whenever possible. And that's how you act and stay in front of the customer, right? So there's all these tricks to get back in front when you're there. There's these little rules. Another really powerful rule for your audience is what I call never forget a face, which is very difficult. And so when I get to a customer, of course, the name of the book is Never Sit in the Lobby, right? So just quickly, I'll explain. Never sit in the lobby means when you get to the lobby, do not sit down, right? So when you get there, either there'll be a reception person of some sort or a phone, right? Once you announce yourself, and of course, if it's a person, often they'll say to you, is he expecting you? Right? They always have that tone, right? Is he expecting you? And like I said from the other story, I go, yeah, he asked me for a quote. Right? Meaning he's not actually really expecting me, but he did ask me for a quote.
But he was expecting a quote, and therefore you were there with said quote.
And so then he's like, the lady will call up and say, Glenn's here. And she's like, oh, what for? And he's got a quote for you. He's like, oh, right. I forgot I asked for that quote. Tell him I'll be right down. Right. But then I don't sit down. I stand up in the lobby and I don't pull out my phone and I don't go scan the awards on the wall of the business and read their literature. And I'm waiting at the door for the person to walk in, because when you're sitting down, one, you're distracted. You might not even notice them walk in, and they walk in and you're like this sitting down, and maybe some 6'4" tall guy comes in and you're looking up at this huge guy above you on your phone. Right. And he's like, are you Glenn? And, and then you have to like rise up to this guy. Right. And I'm not very tall, so I like to start at best height.
Way to go.
Right?
That's a great way to go.
And be on attention, shake their hand, and always ask for a mini tour. Right. And, like I said, so so that's what I mean by never sit in the lobby. But the never forget a face. Well, so oftentimes I'll be 10 minutes early, so I don't have to stand for 10 minutes. In the car, I pull out my phone or my laptop or whatever, and I go to the customer account and I look at the contacts that I've met before, right? Like I'll have their name in my CRM. There might be 6 names, 2 names, 20 names in a big customer, right? And what I do is I do a thing called remembering people, right? So I go to the first person, Bob, right? I'm like, who's Bob? Bob, right? Oh yeah, that's the short guy with bald. He's bald and short, right? Sally, redhead, Jack. That's the skinny dude, whatever, whatever it is, I can remember. And if I can't remember them, I go to LinkedIn and look at their face, right? So I can remember them. Because if you've ever been somewhere and you know people and they say your name, like, oh, hi, Lauren. And then you say, oh, hi. And then there's this huge pregnant pause. And they know you forgot their name.
Hey, you.
Oh, it's so good to see you, right? And you're praying like, please help me out here, right? And and like I say, your memory is good, but it's very deep and it's very slow access time, right? Yes. And then of course, 20 minutes later, you go, oh, right, that's Sally. It's way too late at that point, right?
Yes,
and so
very much.
So remember, you ask them for the mini tour. You're walking through the building. Who are you going to walk by? You're going to walk by Bob and Sally and Jack. And you say, hey, Jack, hey, Bob, hey, Sally. And this person who's heading to take you on the mini tour, right, is thinking, wow, this guy knows everybody. And And remembering people's names in an environment like that at work, where the people are very pleased by that, right? Mm-hmm. That you remember their name. Like it's kind of a subconscious-y kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And, but it's like, wow, it takes them a while. Oh yeah, that's Glenn. I bought that thing from 2 years ago and he remembered my name. Wow, that's impressive. And so those are some of the rapport building, part of the rapport building. Right. And the part about how do you be a pleasure to do business with? So, I started 2 businesses and ran them both for 15 years. And I wasn't, I had a business partner in my latest one and I had 2 partners in the other one. And I mean, the 2 businesses kind of ran similarly, but different. Right. And there were some things over time as the departments grew and, our roles changed or whatever, where, there were a lot of changes I want to make, but, it was getting to be a big company. And I didn't like the way some of our approaches to customer service were and what have you. And I vowed when I started this new company that I was going to create a business where we were truly a pleasure to do business with. Like mm-hmm. that from the ground up, I was going to build the company in that way. When they called, I was going to answer the phone, no voicemail. Right. We do actually finally, after all these years, have an auto attendant because there's like 70 people now. But if you hit, if you go on an auto attendant, you go 0000, it comes straight to me. And if it rings my phone, I'm not at my desk, it rings my cell phone. And I'm like, hi, can I help you? And they're like, oh, I'm trying to get a hold of so-and-so or whatever. And I'm like, oh, well, I'm the owner. Well, I used to be the owner now, but now just the vice president. But whatever. I say, you've got the boss. What do you need? I'll help you. Right. And so that's part of being a pleasure to do business with. Right. And it's just something that you build into the culture of the business. Whereas we have competitors and they have a good amount of business and they have their strengths. I don't know exactly what they are, but one of them I know is not being a pleasure. You know what I mean? Because the customers tell you that it's always a pleasure to do business with you. And when we can't honor you with the business, we always feel bad because we would prefer to buy everything from you. But of course you can't, it doesn't work that way. And, in high tech, sometimes they have to buy other products from other people. Right. Yeah. But if you can leave them wanting to do business with you on a repetitive basis, then you've built some good rapport. Right. And that's, it's just a commitment to being a pleasure to do business with. Right.
I like that a lot, actually, because I find even myself, I think in this day and age, when there's so much noise around different products and different services, that the thing that really does stand out is when it is a pleasure to do business with XYZ company, whether it's B2B or B2C, doesn't really matter in my opinion, almost because it's just how the business conducts themselves. But I find even the example you gave about knowing the people and remembering people's, tongue twister there, but remembering those people, it's actually interesting because even I try to do that on virtual calls which almost seems counterintuitive, but when you're actually on these calls with larger groups of people where you have the champion, the decision maker, and maybe a couple other people who this decision will be affected by, even just like when people have their cameras off and they're quiet, even just addressing the fact that you've talked to them already and saying, hey, how are you? Like, how is your week? And I know you mentioned you were doing XYZ or something where you're actually taking genuine interest. I think it goes a long way because the fact is there's so many services and businesses out there just trying to sell you a product, and gone are the days of that happening, I think, because there's just way too much competition. You need to be a pleasure to do business with. And I like that saying itself because it's very much a simple thing. Like I could easily tell you what it means to be a pleasure to do business with. Like you have a good experience, you come out happy, your questions are answered, the service is good. Even if there's a couple obstacles along the way, they're all settled. So I think it's a nice, simple way to put that. That's very powerful and impactful, which I think is really great. And I'm actually curious for you on your end as a consumer or a customer, based on the fact that you have all this experience of running businesses that are a pleasure to do business with. For you as a customer, have you had any examples or experiences yourself where you had really great customer experience or a business that you interacted with that was a pleasure to do business with? And what was that key factor in there?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes the key factor is it's hard to put words around, right? And because it's just I don't know, it's just the way they're treating you, right? And the way they make you feel special. Or, I mean, when I in my early 20s, I mean, my first brand new car that I bought was a Mazda, and a fellow named Ryan sold it to me, and I love the process of dealing with him and Mazda so much because, again, it's not a flawless execution when you buy a car. They break down,
Absolutely.
blah, blah, blah. And what happens? How does Ryan, the salesman, treat you after he sold you the car? Oh,
Exactly.
just call service, click, or you've reached my voicemail, or no, he was always there. I bought 4 Mazdas from him. Nice. And then he quit and he went to Mercedes and I switched to Mercedes.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And so now
that's the power
Mercedes.
of good relationships. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. Now, unfortunately, he was in the used group. But he recommended me to a good person. Right. And so I couldn't give him the deal, but I did switch brands with him. And I used to, there's a story in my book, which really encapsulates it. It's called Thank God It's Broken. And it's a story about it refers to Simpson Sears and Sears in the end, they did go bankrupt, right? Which broke my heart. When I was a teenager, I worked at Sears, so I saw it in action where they had this, instead of being a pleasure to business, but it was the customer's always right. Like Sears is the company that coined that, right? Really? And they had satisfaction guaranteed or your money back 365 days for 1 year, right? If you're not satisfied, we'll give you the money back. And I worked in the jewelry repair department, right? And doing watch straps and, adjusting chains and things and whatever. It was a great job as a teenager. I loved it so much. And we dealt with all these customers. And one day a guy came into my counter and he said, I bought this watch and I want to return it. And I'm not happy. I'm not satisfied. I'm like, okay, can I see your receipt? Yeah, it gives me the receipt. And, let's say it was May 10th, the receipt was dated like May 11th, right? So it was 364 days old, right? Oh, and I'm like, and the watch was just beat up, right? The watch was really beat up, right? And me being the teenager that I am, right? I'm thinking, what an outrage. This guy wants his money back. So I called upstairs to the customer service department, right? And I'm quietly talking to them. And I'm like, yeah, there's a guy here and he has a watch and it's 364 days old and he wants his money back. And they're like, well, why does he want his money back? And I go, well, he said he's not satisfied. And he goes, give him his money back, click, right? And so I gave him his money back. He went over to the other counter and he bought a brand new watch, right?
Oh, no way.
But he probably came back 364 days later, maybe got another new watch, or maybe he didn't. Now,
he's just hemorrhaging or hedging these watches against each other.
But years later, I move into apartments and then houses and things like that. I bought all my appliances at Sears. And whenever there was a problem, I knew Sears would take care of it. It was one phone number. Didn't matter if it was a microwave or a stove or a washer or a dryer or whatever. You knew that it was 1-800 call Sears or something, and your problem would be solved, right? And they would figure out which department to put you through. They would hand you off delicately and nicely. And that's how it's done, right? And now the mistake I see salespeople make, which that's why I call it "Thank God It's Broken," which is a lot of people are like, they get the big deal, and then the moment it's broken and there's a problem, they want the sort of administrative staff to deal with the customer because, they might be angry or whatever. And that's the worst thing you can do, right? The madder the customer is, the more aggressively you should chase getting to that phone to be the one to help them, right? Because what they'll remember is how you helped them when they were mad, upset, and hurt and painful over the product or the stress, and you were there for them. That's what they'll remember when you give them a quote in the lobby, right? When you drop the quote off with something in your hand, something in your mind, and he looks down, he goes, you're 3% higher than the other guy. And then next day you get the PO, right? Yeah. And that's because he'd rather pay 3% more to buy it from you because he knows you'll answer the phone. And the other guy didn't do that the last time, you know what I mean? That kind of a thing, right? So, yeah. No, and that's, that's how I kind of tie all that together, right?
No, that's awesome. I think what's really, really interesting about all the insights you shared is that actually a lot of the concepts that we talk about on the show is very much towards like the digital marketing strategies and the retention strategies and all these things to do, because obviously a lot of our listeners are Shopify business owners, people who are running e-commerce or digital businesses. But we should never forget that there are tried and true practices that work really well, both whether it's face-to-face or virtually. Yeah. Obviously, some businesses are entirely remote or some businesses are entirely in person. But I really like they're very simple and powerful ways to do things where it's genuinely just caring about the person and going about it that, you're providing that awesome experience. And I think it's a really nice reminder as part of all these different topics that we bring onto the show. So I think you really hit the nail on the head with just bringing unique insights, unique examples, unique stories. And I know a lot of people will likely go and buy that book because I feel like it's a fresh reminder for how to just go about doing good business. So thank you so much for providing all those insights. And
you're welcome, Lauren.
I think that'll bring us to a close for this episode this time. But before I do let you go, we always have a lightning round. Okay. And so what we do on the lightning round is 3 really quick questions.
Okay.
And so think of the first thing that comes to mind, and then we end on a piece of advice, and then we're on our way.
Awesome.
All right. So first lightning round question. What do you think is more important, sales or marketing?
Okay, so I can only give you my sales and marketing answer, which it's in my brain and it's just going to come out. So my rule with sales and marketing is don't confuse sales and marketing. Marketing is everything that leads up to having your person in front of or in some way closing business with a customer. That's selling is me in front of the customer, getting the business. Everything else is marketing. Don't confuse one with the other. Meaning if you're a salesman, your job's to close deals, then you focus on closing deals and let the marketing rep get you the leads. Don't be like, oh, I spend the first 2 hours playing around on LinkedIn doing that. No, that's marketing. That's not selling. Now, if your job is sales and marketing, then maybe that's maybe you don't have a lead gen department, but make sure if you're running a team that you know the difference between the two, right? Because a lot of salespeople, like I like to joke here, in our sales department is the only room in the building where the nails in the chair are pointing upwards, right? So that when they sit down, the chairs are very uncomfortable, right? Yeah. Because we need them in front of the customers or on the phone, right? Not everything's done face to face, right? But the marketing guys, they have a different job. And I always try to make sure that people are not confusing, I like to spend 2-3 days, 2.5 days in the, doing prospecting and things like that. That I think is better done by the marketing team, generating those leads and having the real salespeople that enjoy that piece of it be in front of the customers, closing the deals. So they're both important. If you don't have leads for the sales guys, they have nothing to close. And if the salesmen are not closing the deals, the marketing people won't have a job, right? So they're kind of equally important. And that's my sales and marketing answer.
Nice. Okay.
Sorry, I rambled a bit there, but
No, you're all good. When I saw that lightning round question, I was like, I know this is going to be an interesting one because my team likes to come up with very interesting questions and they really bring you to a thinker there. So, okay. Second question. If you could pitch your customer experience strategies to any company, which one would it be and why?
If I could pitch my marketing strategy, you mean the ones like in my book and stuff, my strategies stuff?
Yeah.
Which company? Oh, oh my goodness gracious. That's really good.
I told you this team comes up with great questions.
Yeah.
They make my job look very easy here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's so many ways my mind is going, but I mean, I'm a total geek over like music equipment, professional audio equipment and things like that. I have a sound recording studio at home and I'm a bedroom DJ and whatever. And I mean, I'd probably pick someone like Pioneer DJ or Denon DJ or somewhere like that, where I'm so geeked out on the equipment that it's like, I would love to go in there and be able to just be immersed in their products and, and then share the way I do it and share those products with customers. And, and it would be truly a passion for me. I also love cars like Mercedes and stuff, but that's kind of a different thing. And I mean, I don't think I want to be selling cars, but So
maybe the next business in the DJ world or the music equipment world, who knows? We'll bring you back on the show then.
Right, for sure.
We'll do retention all over again in the music world.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Last but not least in the lightning round.
Yeah.
If you had to sell a holiday destination to our listeners, which location would it be?
Greece.
Oh, simple. You just had no hesitation there.
Well, yeah, because it's an endless destination, right? I mean, you could start in Athens for a couple of days, then you do Santorini and Mykonos, and you never do more than 2 islands, maybe unless they're a cluster, right? You never do more than 2 islands per trip. But you could never, if you went every summer for 2 to 3 weeks, you would never visit all of the spots in Greece. That's and awesome. Each one is like an individual paradise with its own sort of unique microculture and, of course the scenery is epic and yeah, so that would be my answer. Greece.
Great answer. Greece is on my bucket list. So
Yeah.
you've sold me. Actually, my friends and I were just talking about that, how they have all these different areas that you would just have to go multiple times or
you do. Yeah.
figure out a way to kind of do all this island hopping and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's too far to go between the islands. That's why you can only do one or two, because it takes the whole day on the ferry.
I kind of love that though. I think that's great.
Yeah, it is fun. But if you only have 2 weeks, you don't want to be spending 3 or 4 days, 8 hours of the day on a ferry, right? So you kind of do 1 or 2 and, maybe 3, right? And then come back the next year to do another set of islands, right? And so lots of fun.
Love that though. Great answer. Okay. So final thing is just a piece of advice. We always like to end it on a nice note of bringing some advice to all of our listeners on top of all of the golden nuggets of information that you shared today. But the last question is there a piece of marketing or life advice that someone shared with you once that has always stayed with you?
Yeah, though. So I shared it in my book and I'll share it now. And that advice is, and it doesn't matter if you're face-to-face or virtual customer e-commerce, this advice holds true for every person and every walk of life, business, professional, whatever, personal. And that is, you only get forever to make another impression. And
wow.
So what that means is and I tell the story in the book, when the boss comes in the office and he walks by your desk and he sees you sort of on Facebook, and then as he walks by, you catch him and you alt tab over to Salesforce, the CRM, right? He notices that, right? And then a week later, he walks by your desk and he sees you alt tab from Facebook over to the CRM, and guess what? You're now a bum, right? You're officially a bum, right? And so, our moms always told us, you only get a chance, one chance at a first impression, right? And I totally agree with that. But what I say is every impression is like a first impression. And whether you like it or not, you're making an impression. So you better make it a good one, right? So when you're at work and, make sure, when you see important people around, ask them questions, engage with them, right? Stop them. Hey, I'm sure you're busy, but I'm working on this huge deal. Can I get a piece of advice from you? And just do whatever you can to stand out as being the most star player, because that's how star players get rewarded, right? Because they act like star players. So that's my advice. Always be looking at the next impression you're making with people, friends, family, everyone, right?
I love that.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, with that, we will end the episode. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. Lauren. I really appreciate you taking the time. Yeah. And I know all the listeners will be very excited and they will not be sitting in the lobby.
Perfect.
Awesome. Thank you, Glenn.
Thanks, Lauren. Thank you.